Welcome back to the Ballet Help Desk podcast. My name is Jenny, and I'm joined by my co-founder, Brett. We are super excited as we have our very first executive director on the pod today. We are welcoming Shane Jewell. He is the current executive director of Oregon Ballet Theater. He hails from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and has 20 years of experience working in performing arts administration and producing. He most recently was the general manager of the Gibney Company in New York City, where he built an infrastructure and strategic plan for a newly formed contemporary dance company that performed in New York City and toured internationally. Prior to that, he served as executive director for Orlando Ballet, executive director for Oklahoma City Ballet, and executive director for OK Mozart International Music Festival. Shane has raised over $30 million to various nonprofits of his employ. He successfully completed 2 capital campaigns and multi-million-dollar sustainability campaigns while maintaining operational contributed income. Both Orlando and Oklahoma City Ballet also saw increased ticket sales and school enrollment during his tenure. He has been very involved in committees where he's lived. He's served as a member of the Leadership Oklahoma City, Leadership Orlando, Oklahoma City Rotary, and Bartersville Rotary. He also sat on the Price Tower Advisory Council, Oklahoma Contemporary Art Educational Committee, Downtown Bartlesville Inc. Advisory Board, and Oklahoma Presenters Network. Shane is a member of Dance USA and served as interim chair of the Managers Council for dance organizations with budgets from 3.5 to 15 million. So, without further ado, the help desk is now open. Brett and I created Ballet Help Desk as the resource we wish we had when our kids were going through ballet training. Now we've got some exciting news. For a while, many of you have asked for an ad-free option, and we've been listening. We are thrilled to introduce the Ballet Help Desk Backstage Pass on Patreon. With your subscription, you will get every episode ad-free. The full back catalog, remastered with higher quality audio, and early access to the episodes before they are released publicly. As our Patreon community grows, we'll be adding new ways for you to connect more deeply with the podcast and the Ballet Help Desk community. Subscribe today. See you backstage.
Shane, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
So, we're really excited to talk to you because you're the first executive director of a ballet company that we've had on.
Oh my gosh, I'm really honored then.
This is new territory for us. So, ballet companies are nonprofits. We'll talk about that later, why they're nonprofits. But what does that actually mean in terms of how you run the organization?
Well, it means a few things. In some ways, people have a misconception when they think of a nonprofit because they think it's not a real business, quote unquote. What a nonprofit, the only thing it legally means is that the government has recognized the service that we give to a community, and because of that service, they allow us to purchase certain things without having to pay the normal tax that a for-profit entity would. And it also allows people to donate to our organizations and get a tax write-off for that donation, which is a critical part of the arts business model in America. And the arts wouldn't look the same in America were it not for that nonprofit designation. A lot of people also think that the goal of a nonprofit is to not make any money, hence the name nonprofit. And while we are certainly not an organization that benefits if there is an excess, we're not paying out shareholders or anything if there is a surplus at the end of a year. But we also do have to be mindful that we are building up enough cash reserves. Typically, they say in the nonprofit world, you would like at least 6 months of operating cash as a reserve. And I think for those of us that have now lived through COVID, we see a perfect example of why you have those cash reserves, because there are things that happen that vastly impact your revenue, especially in ballet companies where you have like one show like Nutcracker. Nutcracker for most ballet organizations is 20% of our annual income in one performance. And that happens in 1 month. And if something goes on in that month to disrupt that, then we have real problems. So we are certainly trying to make sure that we keep, at least at Oregon Ballet Theater, we want to keep as much money on the stage and with the artists and with the staff as possible. We also have to make sure we're balancing that with, fiscal responsibility and making sure that we have cash reserves in case something goes wrong, that no matter what, our people will be paid and we can move forward. But I think sometimes people feel like a nonprofit's goal is to not make money. And while that's certainly not the goal, we are not ever budgeting to make more surplus revenue than we need. But we want to spend as much as we make, often because we're trying to be stewards of these donations. People are investing in us because they believe in our art form or because they believe in what the arts does for our community. So I take issue when people say nonprofit isn't a real business. It certainly isn't the same as a for profit organization, but we also have a board of directors. And that's a volunteer group of people that help us set strategic priorities. They get no financial benefit from being on the board. There's no shareholders that we answer to. So there's a few differences between for profit and nonprofit, but not as many as people might think.
So, has there ever been a thought that ballet companies would become for profit organizations?
Yes, there has been. I think that there's a few challenges with that. First, I would say right now in America, and I'll only speak to America because it's done differently in different parts of the country or different parts of the world. Our business model relies on 30 to 40% of our annual revenue coming from donations, which means that we don't make enough money off of ticket sales or school revenue, which is our two main sources of earned income, because we have earned income and then contributed income. We don't make enough to be able to sustain ourselves. So were it not for the 30 to 40% of additional revenue that comes through donations, we wouldn't exist as we exist today. It would have to be a very different conversation about how ballet continues in America. It's critical for us. And also, I would say that putting on a ballet production takes a lot of work and takes a lot of expense. There's anywhere from 5 to 8 weeks of rehearsal time for the full company, which is paid. There's all the theater time, the sets, the costumes, the orchestra. And I would say a majority, and maybe not a major majority because of Nutcracker, but we budget for shows to lose money on several of our shows, and we try and minimize those losses as much as we can. But the only way that works, that we can budget for those losses, is because we have contributed income to offset the losses. So I don't know what the benefit would be to arts organizations deciding to adopt a nonprofit model if we lost that revenue stream, which is so important. Now, if you were to look at Europe, for example, about 40% of many of their annual revenue comes from government support. In America, we do it differently, but either way, they both need a subsidy or support from external sources because we are not Hamilton. We can't charge $1,000 a ticket, nor would we want to if we could, because that's not what we're here to do. We're here to make sure that as many people want to experience this beautiful art form can. And so that's why we make some of those choices that we make and rely so much on that contributed revenue.
That's helpful. Okay, let's talk jobs.
Let's talk about it.
There's an executive director and an artistic director of most companies. How do the two jobs differ? And then how do you two work together?
I think that's such a great question, and it is a little bit unique to our industry because what we do is it's actually a co-equal leadership model. So we don't have a president and CEO, one person at the top that makes all decisions. We truly are co-equal leaders. I don't answer to the artistic director, and the artistic director doesn't answer to me. And it's for a very specific reason because we have very different priorities. And the right answer is often the answer that is in the middle of where our two priorities lie. Because I'm always going to be focused on how do we drive revenue, how are we being efficient with our theater time, with our rehearsal time, making sure we're being good stewards of those donations we're getting. And artistically, how are we challenging the company? Are we doing the types of ballets that are fulfilling for them artistically, that are pushing them artistically, but also balancing that with what our audiences want to see and the financial realities we have of we need certain shows to do X amount of revenue every year to continue in the business model we have, because as we all know, the cost of doing business is not decreasing and we have to keep up with that. So it is the relationship between the executive and artistic director, which is based on a lot of trust and mutual respect, to say that we have different viewpoints for a reason, and we need to find what is the middle ground between our two viewpoints that is going to best serve the organization holistically. We can't just do ballets that are great for the dancers and push them artistically if they won't sell any tickets. Conversely, we can't just do, very commercially successful ballets that dancers don't want to dance and they wouldn't want to be a part of a company that only does that work. So it's always that balance, that give and take. And we both answer to the board. But what I think is really important is we only go to the board once we have come to a decision. We don't ever want to put the board in the position to be a tiebreaker between an executive and artistic director because it's so important that we are building that continued relationship of trust and mutual respect and finding the solution. So the artistic director obviously is in charge of everything that happens on the stage. All of our dancers has a huge part in artistically how we grow the school, what type of ballet training we are giving our young people, what that experience is like for them. So everything that happens that continues this gorgeous art form is the artistic director's focus. The executive director is focused on the business side, the budgeting, making sure we're efficient with our time, the fundraising, the sales, HR. And then both of us are communicating and engaging the board so they not only can help us set strategic priorities, but also they're our greatest support system. And we want our boards to be engaged enough that they're excited to activate their spheres of influence to bring more people to the ballet and to help us get more donors. So they're very different relationships or very different jobs. And I think it would be very hard to find someone that has the background and skill set to be able to do both at the same time. So it's a bit unique to our industry, but it works really well when it works well.
How connected is a typical executive director to kind of the day to day goings on of the relationship between dancers and the artistic staff?
Well, it's hard to speak for all executive directors because many of them, they all have their different styles. I think that in general, especially at Oregon Ballet Theater, we feel pretty connected to how things are going on a day to day basis. I am often in communication, obviously, with our artistic director, as well as our artist manager, who kind of manages the company. I am the point person. Our dancers are union, they're AGMA, which is the American Guild of Musical Artists. And so I am the point person for all things that have to do with the union. So I'm in constant communication. They're a union representative. We have monthly meetings with our dancer representatives, as well as the artistic and executive staff, talking about just how things are going on a day-to-day basis, how rehearsals, how's the scheduling. So I feel pretty connected as to how things go. I can't speak for everyone, but certainly we're not the ones that are in the studios. We're not in every rehearsal. But if things are going well or not going well, we usually hear about it and we're there to help problem solve. It's so important for us to create an environment where our dancers feel supported, but not only as artists, as individuals. And so like one thing I say at the beginning of every year when I talk to the company is that, my door is always open. And that doesn't mean if you don't like the role you got cast in, that I'm the person you should come and speak to. But if you want to talk about what's happening with the organization or how we're doing financially, or, I mean, we know dancers, have a finite career. And if you're interested in talking about what, working in arts administration looks like. So I try and keep really connected to the dancers while still respecting, I'm not ever going to be the one in rehearsal telling them what to do. We're all grateful for that. That's not what I'm here
I always think the day-to-day runnings of ballet organizations are always so fascinating. Because all financial statements are public record, can you walk us through a budget and understand how the numbers actually translate into decisions for these dancers? Because what you do actually does directly affect them every single day.
Absolutely. Sure. So how our budget works, like I said before, we kind of break up our revenue into two sections, earned revenue and contributed revenue. Our earned revenue is our ticket sales in our school, which for us makes up around 68 to 70% of our annual income, and the rest of it is donations. And so the ticket sales is about 50% of the income. So the programming is a big part of how we strategically think about not only what we're doing artistically, what we need to do financially. So certainly the program impacts the dancers because they're always very invested in the types of programs that we pick. And it means a lot. There are dancers that are looking, when they look to move to other companies, one of the first things they look at is what's their rep? What kinds of shows are they doing? So it's just as much a retention and recruitment tool as it is a way to generate revenue from our audiences. But then it comes into how does that impact dancers about, their pay and, the compensation, all of that. Now for us, those are the decisions that really drive the beginning of the budget because those are our mandatories. We can change programming year to year, and we do change programming year to year, and those based on the financial realities that we're in. And if we're in a good year, then maybe we can be a bit riskier with next year's programming. And if we're having a tough year, maybe we need to do some tried and true shows that we know are going to bring in a certain amount of revenue. But what the financial goals that we need to meet for that year are often set after we have set our mandatories. And our mandatories is like dancer compensation. Now, for us, because they are AGMA, that is a negotiation that happens with the union and the dancer representatives. They're very much part of the negotiation process. And AGMA is the one that's doing the work for us to show, this is, market rate for dancers at different levels for companies of your budget size. Because in America, there are ballet companies ranging from budgets to 500,000 to 50 million plus. And so obviously, the compensation for dancers is partly going to be based on how large your organization is. We have another level of kind of scrutiny we run through when we look at compensation, which isn't just comparing ourselves to other ballet companies, but also the consumer price index, because it costs more or less to, live in different cities. And so we kind of go, okay, so here's the compensation analysis based on comparable size companies, running that through a consumer price index of cost of living of where we are. And that's kind of what drives what we need to be for compensation. So once we have set those mandatories, then we start putting in the things that are not mandatory, that are going to change programming, marketing, all of those, so that we make sure that first and foremost, our people are taken care of. And then we figure out how to make the rest of it.
And now a brief pause to hear a word from our sponsors. We are now welcoming reviews of year-round ballet school programs on Ballet Help Desk, whether it's a full-time program, after school, a conservatory, or a company-affiliated school. We welcome all of them. If your dancer has been part of a program, please consider sharing your experience. Imagine there is a family out there right now trying to make an important decision, and your insight could help them feel more confident about their next step. Reviews are completely anonymous, and it takes just a few minutes to complete. And let everyone learn all about the good, the bad, and everything in between. And back to the episode. So, I want to ask you like a slightly different question based on like programming and cost and those kinds of things, because you are one of the companies that is like a creator company, because your artistic director is Danny Rowe and she is a very accomplished, well-known choreographer.
Incredible choreographer.
Uh,
She's
oh,
amazing.
Incredible, incredible, incredible. Does that make a difference having more of a creator company versus more of a rep company, and what that looks like just in terms of budget item line, how that works?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. So, in the ballet world, we do shows in a few ways. There are some shows that we own, like Nutcracker. Everybody owns a Nutcracker because we do it every year, and we will. I mean, I've always joked like if there ever were apocalypse, the only thing that would last would be Nutcracker and Shen Yun. Those would be the only shows that are still being performed. But we also we own Swan Lake, and there's a few other shows that we own, and every other company has a few shows that they own. But then a lot of the programming that happens is rented. So we'll rent the sets and costumes from another ballet company. That can be done one of two ways. Sometimes when you rent sets and costumes from another ballet company, you have to use the choreography that it was designed to go with. Other times, you can just rent the sets and costumes and you can do your own choreography. So either we own it or we rent it are the main two ways that ballet companies do their own productions. Now, when you have a creator artistic director instead of more of a curatorial artistic director, that adds another layer into it because we can't afford to always be building a new production every single season. Oftentimes, when you build a production, I mean, you can spend, on the low end, you can spend a few $100,000. And then if you're building a new Nutcracker, it could be 3, 4, or $5 million. Once you build a new show, though, it takes a long time to recoup that investment. If you spend $2 million to build a show and then you're going to rent out the sets and costumes, you might make $30,000 or $40,000 off the rental of the sets and costumes. And on a $2 million production, that's going to take you so many rentals too. So it's not really a recoupment model. Again, going back to your question about nonprofit, the advantage for us is that we're able to go out to a community and raise funds for new work, which is something that we don't have to worry about recouping because it was an income that we would have been able to get anyway. What has been happening more and more in ballet companies, and I'm thrilled about it, is what's called a co-production. And co-productions are opportunities for multiple ballet companies to come together to say, we believe in building this new work, and we're all going to chip in a third or whatever it is to the cost of that production. And then we will split the reimbursement on the back end, understanding the goal is not 100% reimbursement. It would be ideal, but it would take a long time. But it allows us to then have another show that is in our repertoire that we don't have to rent. We get to perform it for free every time we do it. It allows us to continue to add to the canon of ballet repertoire that exists in America that'll be performed, and it keeps our art form going, which is so critical. So I'll say, like, in the last 2 years, we've been able to do two new works. One was a full length, which was Marilyn, a biography of Marilyn Monroe from her perspective. And that was a co-production with Tulsa Ballet and Ballet Met in Columbus, Ohio. And in fact, it's premiered it here because it was Danny's work. But both of those companies believed in Danny, believed in the work, and said, we want to be part of it. So it's actually getting ready to premiere in Tulsa at the end of this month. And then next season, it goes to Ballet Met. And then this past weekend, we just opened Princess and the Pea, which is a one act that was a co production with the Joffrey. So being able to find those ways to build new work with it still being less of a financial risk on an individual organization is really helpful. But we do have to be strategic. And I can't promise that every season, we've done it 2 years in a row. I can't promise that every season we're going to be able to build a brand new production because it does take, a lot of thought, a lot of work, and a lot of engagement with our donors and with our board that we're going to take this calculated risk. And we think that it's going to pay off in these different ways.
So, can I ask you a question about these co productions? Because, I mean, we're seeing that more and more with ballet companies.
Yeah.
How does the initial funding work? And then who actually owns the rights to everything?
So the funding typically works in we all agree that we're going to split X amount. And, if it's three companies, then the easiest is 33% across the board. And then we all kick in a little bit of startup funds so that we can get designs done and get it bid out to get a total cost of what the production is going to be. And by that time, our contract with the different organizations says that we agree to spend up to X amount of dollars. If it goes over that, then the co-producers need to get together and make that decision and agree upon that and agree that they're going to invest X amount more. But what we're talking about, when we're talking about what we own, is that we're talking predominantly about the sets and costumes. Like, Oregon Ballet Theater does not own the choreography or the music rights or the costume designer rights or the lighting designer rights to Maryland. Danny owns the choreography because she created it. Our composer owns the music rights. And so for each company, which is similar to how if you rent a ballet, the same thing is going to happen. You're going to rent the sets and costumes from one organization. Then you're going to have to pay the choreographer the rights for the choreography. You're going to have to pay the composer the rights for the music or recording label if it's owned by a company. So the rights typically don't get involved in the co-production. We're talking about the physical assets of the production, and that's what we own. So you'll still have to contract those out individually. But then once we've all agreed upon how much we're going to pay, we start laying out a payment schedule. One organization usually is the fiscal sponsor. So we're going to be managing, like Oregon Ballet Theater managed all the funds for Maryland. We finished the construction of the set. We invoiced the two companies for what they owed and they paid it immediately. And we made sure to get everyone paid for their part of it.
So, this is a question I've had for a while. When you've got an artistic director who's also a choreographer and they perform the rep during a season, like let's say someone choreographed something, in 2014, and then it gets programmed in the rep in 2022 and again in 2026. Is that artistic director paid not only as an artistic director, but then also they're getting royalties on their choreography?
That varies from company to company based on their agreement with their artistic director. Some companies prefer to front load payments via a larger salary, and the agreement is that they can do any of that artistic director's work as a choreographer while they are here. Others prefer as a pay to play. If we're going to do your work, we'll pay your royalties. So there's not an industry standard for how that works. It's kind of just up to the individuals and up to the ballet companies to determine, do they want to do one work of their artistic directors every season, multiple works every season? Do they want to do it every once in a while? So it varies kind of broadly on that side.
So what's to stop an artistic director, and this is by no means implying that this happens at OBT, but what's to stop an artistic director who's also a choreographer from just programming their stuff every season and collecting not only their salary but also their royalties for performing that stuff? Or and maybe I'm assuming something that doesn't actually happen, but
I mean, I think there are some companies that are more heavily do their own artistic directors' work than other companies. Certainly, founding artistic director companies where their name is in the company, they certainly rely heavily, if not solely, on that person's work. But for many ballet companies, the decisions about what we're doing in a season don't just rest with one person. It's not just an artistic director saying, this is the season that I want to do, and there's no more discussion. It's a pretty broad conversation. The artistic director and executive director are working very closely and hopefully working multiple seasons at a time in the future, as opposed to just looking at one snapshot. And then it's really just kind of a balance of, what is our audience telling us they want, not only through the feedback we're getting from surveys, but historical data and sales and what shows have typically done well. It's not always just about driving revenue. The back end of it is there are shows that are less expensive to do. So you might not make as much revenue, but if it didn't cost you as much, your net could be the same or greater than a really expensive show that might bring in a ton of revenue. And then the board has to ultimately approve that season. So the executive director, the artistic director, the marketing director, the finance director, and the production staff all have a hand in putting together what ultimately becomes the season. I should also say the school director also comes into play because there will be times we want to do shows that have more opportunities for our students, if that's a really important priority for the organization at the time. So because no one is siloed and I'm just doing this, you don't often see that happening unless it is a strategic decision by the organization.
So, with all of these people that have like a say, how much say do they actually have? Or is it kind of you and Danny working it out and then everyone comes in and was like, well, we did that a few years ago and it didn't work quite so well. Like, how much say do they actually have?
Yeah,
Making it sound like it's very, very collaborative that way. And I'm not saying it's not, it's just
I
like,
hear you. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, there's got to be one or two people that are given the green light or the red light. And when it comes to different productions, we really do try to listen to all the different perspectives because they have so much expertise in what they do. And there are things that we often may not consider about how long it would take to load in a show based on the size of it. And do we have that much time in the theater? Can the show fit into the theater physically? Because the size of the sets, there's some shows like, Don Quixote is a massive production. It can't fit into every performing arts center. Similarly, our marketing and our box office team, they're giving us their predictions on what they think revenue is going to be driven for each of those shows. And that has a huge impact on what we decide to do and not do, because regardless of what we may want to program, if the numbers aren't backing up what we need them to be, you kind of set a bar for one season to the next. We can't typically program to make less money because everything else is more expensive the next season. And people need to get raises and, the cost of doing business just continues to go up. So I would say that we really do listen to whittle it down to some shows that there aren't any red flags. They're going to do what we need to do financially. They're going to fit into our theaters. Our dancers artistically and physically can do these roles in a way that represents the company and themselves well. And once we get down to they've checked all of those boxes, we might be down to, one or two shows that we're looking to fill in a slot. And at that point, I really tried to allow the artistic director to say, "Hey, what are you feeling?" Because you have allowed us into your world enough to talk about what sales are going to be and to talk about, what it's going to be from a production side. I really hope that the artistic director feels proud of each season that we put on and feels represents the company well. So I would say ultimately it falls to Danny, but not without many, many filters of making sure that it's still good for the organization.
Which are a few of your shows aside from Nutcracker that is like a full bread and butter show for you? That really connects to your OBT audience and brings people in every single time. Like a lot of people say they're triple bills, they're always harder to fill. It's harder to get new audience, except for someone who we interviewed, John Malik in Madison Ballet, who said that his full lengths do not sell, and the only thing that sells for him is his triple bills and new
That's so
work.
interesting. What?
I know. I
Uh,
know.
uh,
So
they're
so
very
that's why I'm
lucky.
so curious. Well, yes, but that's a lot of pressure to put on that many
That's true.
triple bills.
Good point. Good point. Good point. I think mixed reps for me are personally, just my personal preference, are some of the most beautiful work that we do. I mean, I am just so proud of our mixed reps. But the difference, and I don't just mean at OBT, I mean apparently everywhere but Madison, the difference in sales is starkly different. I mean, we are, like I said, we just opened Princess and the Pea this past weekend, and it's doing what it needs to do for budget. It's going to be about 60% less than what we just sold for Sleeping Beauty and Dracula.
People love Dracula. It
People
is
love Dracula.
they love it.
And so when you talk about those tried and true, there's kind of two avenues of tried and true other than Nutcracker. There's the tried and true classics, your Swan Lakes, your Sleeping Beauties, your Giselles, like your ballet fans are like these not only artistically show so much about what the company is capable of, but are really something we can depend on financially. And then there is your tried and true, more commercial full lengths. And many of those are stories that you see represented in other mediums. So your Dracula, your Alice in Wonderland, your Wizard of Oz, these shows that people have a relationship with because of movies or musicals or books. Sometimes it is a challenge in an art form that is not always, but more often than not, nonverbal to create a new narrative because if people don't understand what all the hand signals mean, they might have a hard time following along. So it's a little bit easier for audiences to watch a narrative that they already kind of know what's happening. So, like, your Peter Pans, things like that. We try and do a balance of at least one of those tried and true classics that people are going to love, and then a different audience, like we did Dracula and Sleeping Beauty in this season. That's a perfect example. Both tried and true for very different reasons and with different audiences. And it's
Really?
important. Absolutely. Our Dracula audience was much more diverse. I would say skewed a little bit younger. We had so many people dressing up in vampire costumes. I mean, like they were into it. And we don't have as many people dress up for Swan Lake. Occasionally we get some Odettes out there, but not as often. And so I think it's important for us that we recognize that at a ballet company, we need to try and have a little bit of something for everybody. Because if we lean too heavily on one type of ballet, we risk alienating another part of our, foundational patron base. And right now, the arts cannot afford to be alienating anybody. And so it really is this chess game of putting together that right season that checks all those boxes.
And now, time for a quick ad break.
Summer intensives are coming fast, and we just published our Summer Intensive Essentials Guide over on our website. We focused on products dancers really rely on, the things that set them up for an incredible summer. Everything in it has been used by real dancers at real programs, and wherever we could, we made a point to include products from dance run businesses because we love supporting people who are building something in this industry. And don't forget to pick up our very own corrections journal to help you have an amazing summer. Some of these links are affiliate links, so shopping through our guide is a great way to support the show at no extra cost to you. You'll find the links in our show notes or head over to our website, ballethelpdesk.com.
Now, back to the episode. It's interesting that you say that nobody can afford to alienate an audience right now. I mean, everybody's clearly trying to expand their audience. With your programming, how are you guys looking at different ways of attracting a more diverse audience with your whole season? Because we all know that season ticket holders are kind of the bread and butter, right? Like if you have season ticket holders, you know they're coming to everything, you know they'll be sitting in those seats. But how are you talking to different audiences depending on what the programming is?
Well, it's a couple of different ways. One way is obviously through the programming itself and trying to make sure that, like if you look at Princess and the Pea, for example, it is a mixed rep. And Princess and the Pea is a new contemporary work that's kind of like it's almost like if a Pixar movie were a ballet, like children will just think it's fun and hilarious, and the adults will see that it's talking about bigotry and some really deep social themes. But on that same program is Balanchine's Rubies, very different kind of work, very different audience for that work. So part of it is trying to make sure we continue that programming where we have something for everybody. But then another part of it is through the marketing lens. Like, how are we speaking to people? Where are we finding those people? And what is it that's attracting them to come to the ballet? One of the things I've always just believed so much in is that we are a beautiful, beautiful art form, and marketing doesn't always reflect that. I think that an ad for a ballet should be something that you would want. If there was no text on it, you would still want to frame that and put it up on your wall, because that our medium is so perfect for photography and videography, more so than I would say any of the other performing arts. Of what you can do with dance and photography and videography can really just be breathtaking. And so investing in that upfront capital of, we need marketing material that are not only going to show the quality of the production, because people see an ad and based on the quality of the work in that ad, they're going to make assumptions about the quality of the work on stage. If I had an ad for Dracula and it was a bunch of clip art for Microsoft Word, that would probably tell you something about the quality of our show. And so, how we're getting to people and what they're seeing when we do connect with them is another big part. But also the types of groups. I mean, groups is becoming a big thing for us. I mean, we brought hundreds of foster kids to the Nutcracker for the first time this year, and that was so incredible. But then the next night we had a corporate event for 150 people where they wanted a Christmas event for their employees. And through those employees, so many of them said, "Oh my God, it's my first time at the ballet. I had a great time. Can't wait to go to the next one." So it's a yes and conversation. There's not one strategy.
I think that's so interesting. So tell me a little bit more about the groups. Like, I haven't heard that before.
So group sales is something that we have been really trying to push more. And sometimes that is, we're trying to do groups like we are focusing through our education and community engagement lens. And we're trying to, I mean, this is how part of the way that we get to maintain our nonprofit status is that we serve a community. There are studies out there that show that if a child has not been exposed to an art form by the time they're 10 years old, there's less than 1% chance they'll be a patron of that art form as an adult. So making sure those kids, and we have like at OBT, I think we have close to 20,000 kids that experience ballet every year for free or for very low cost, because that's part of what we do to serve. Now, on the flip side, because we're also a business, we are also looking for those groups that have capacity. And so we're going out to retirement centers all the time and corporations all the time and saying, how about a different kind of event for your team? Take them to, and so we have a special room that we set up, and they get to have a reception, and they get to have drinks, or they might get to go on stage and get a photo with a dancer and enhance that experience. So we are just always looking for new ways that we can bring in a whole group of people. And from that group, we may retain 10%. And if that's the case, then we're continuing to grow that audience base. And that audience base also becomes that donor base. There's a lot of studies out there that show that from the first time a person gets for their first ballet experience, if you can get them to a third ballet, the chances of them becoming a season subscriber have increased by 40%, and the chance of them becoming a donor have increased by 25%. So we are laser focused on our first time ticket buyers. If you come to the ballet for the first time, you're going to get a discount offer for the next ballet, because we want to get you that second show. And then, and this may seem counterintuitive, for the third show, you're going to get an even bigger discount then you got the second time because we've got to get you into that third show. It's because we know that it's going to increase your likelihood that you're going to start to patronize the ballet on a regular. So for us, it's just as much about finding those new people via groups or however, and then how do we keep them coming back?
So you mentioned something when we were talking earlier about donors and how the whole notion of the donor base is changing. How does that kind of square with the program you guys are looking at, the audience development you're looking at, and how you're continuing to have enough donations coming in to cover that 40% that the other things don't cover?
It's a great question. I think that we're in the midst of this big generational shift of wealth right now. And I think nonprofits in general, not just the arts, are all trying to find out how does that change the philanthropic landscape in our community as social media and the internet, the world has continued to get, smaller and smaller and smaller. And one of the things that has impacted is people's sense of community and where they live. And we have found that donors, especially this new generation of donors that are coming up, don't often always have that same sense of community responsibility that their parents had. Sometimes they donate to organizations, even if they weren't big fans of the ballet, because they know it's an anchor arts organization in their community. It's important for the profile of a city to have top tier ballet, to have top tier orchestra, to have top tier opera, art museum. These are the things that make a city thrive and make people want to, move there to, live, work, and play in whatever city that is. And that was a big part of what drove donors for generations, even, and certainly for the last 100 years. But now I think that donors are more keyed into what are we doing next season? Are they the kinds of ballets that I want to go see or that I want to bring my friends to? What's my experience as a donor when I get to the ballet? Is there a special reception for us? Do we get to feel that we have an elevated experience because we're investing in this organization? And even from a non-performance, I mean, we're sending out these behind the scenes newsletters. Our donors get to know what our seasons are before the general public. We're always trying to find these ways right now to make donors feel more special because there's less sense of that you just donate because that's what you do. And there are so many nonprofits and so many worthy causes. I don't mean to say that, I mean, social services, whatever it is. And we're over here, and sometimes we get put in this quality of life bucket. And it can be more like, oh, well, if we have enough left over, we might give to the arts. But if you look at, especially Portland right now, Portland is a city that is really trying to revitalize after a few tough years and maybe not some great national press. And part of that revitalization has been a focus on our downtown and bringing our downtown back to life and how the arts are such a big part of that. I mean, OBT, we bring around 100,000 people downtown every year. And that's a significant impact to the restaurants and the shopping and everything that exists around there. So I think that we have to be a little bit more thoughtful with how our program might also impact our donors than we used to. But that's just part of it. We get bored if it was just the same thing all the time. We got to do a few things to change it up.
Sure, because, ballet's not hard enough. We
That's right. That's right.
I don't know. I always think too with this like rise in tech, I wonder because there was so much an emphasis on STEM, not STEAM. There was like this movement to try to get it to be STEAM, but it didn't really take off, right? And STEM really kind of became the thing. And I'm sure you see it like we do here in San Francisco. Those companies are not donating to ballet. They're not
Not at
donating to
all.
art in the same way.
No, no.
I
And
mean, are
we've
you guys making any inroads that way with tech?
I mean, when you talk about tech, there are ways that we are making inroads, not with the companies that are showing up with big corporate donations. We're making inroads with the way that we use AI to make us more efficient, to make us better at what we do. I think it's really interesting seeing how tech is really starting to become part of the infrastructure of building new works and the amount of projection, projection mapping you see in new works. I think it's really interesting on how that's going to transfer in the field. But we haven't as of yet seen those big tech companies that are making those incredible profits spending more on the arts. But that also it seems counterintuitive to me. So, like, you look at Houston Ballet, right? One of the big ballet companies in the country, in one of the most conservative cities in the country. And a lot of people thought that didn't seem that maybe that was also counterintuitive. Why is it such a big ballet company in Houston? Well, corporate sponsorships is a big part of their annual income because those oil and gas companies, and my first ballet company was Oklahoma City Ballet, and much similar to Houston on a much smaller scale, but we got a ton of corporate sponsorship from those oil and gas companies because they understood if we want to create a city that people want to move here to work here and live, work, and play here, then we've got to have top tier arts and culture. And I haven't seen that investment strategy as much lately. So we've actually been moving away from talking to corporations about community responsibility and have seen most of our success talking to corporations about marketing
Wait,
because
can you
we
talk
do.
about that more?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because, like, for example, Fred Meyer, who's a chain here, grocery stores in this part of the country, just came in as a major sponsor for Nutcracker because of the marketing exposure that it gives them, and because how much we invest in that holiday show. We're seeing a lot of the corporate dollars for community responsibility start to dry up. But they still have marketing dollars because they still got to drive those profits. So if we come to them as a way of this is going to help you grow your business, we're seeing a much better response from them.
Is it sort of the kind of the professional sports model, not the one where you have like, your brand plastered along the basketball court or on the wall, but it allows for client entertainment, good PR for the organization to be associated with it. But like I think of like the equivalent of a luxury box at a basketball game, right?
Absolutely.
Like big corporate sponsors of OBT could bring their top sales performers or their top clients, and they could have a box, right, at the ballet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, yeah, I mentioned Fred Meyer before. When they just became our Nutcracker sponsor this year, they have the whole dress rehearsal, 2,800 seats. It's all theirs. So they give it all to their employees. That's a big, kind of a Christmas gift to them. Also, we go out and do these like 10 or 15-minute little Nutcracker, performances in Fred Meyer stores. Like, we are driving people to their stores to do these performances. So very much is similar to the professional sports model where those corporate sponsors are getting a lot of benefits that go above and beyond. Thank you for your support of our community.
Okay, so how do you handle the small dollar donors? The small dollar donors can add up in over time, and how do you reward them or not, or make them feel like that their money is actually has value and is going toward bettering the organization?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And I would say from our total individual contributions, our donors under 1,000 make up 25 to 30% of it. So it's a significant chunk of money. But to your point, it's a lot of 25, $100, $500. So much so that with our major donors, I mean, we all know who they are, and we're communicating with them on a one-off basis fairly frequently, making sure that they remain engaged. But when you have 1,000 people giving $25 or more, it's much harder to have that same personal connection. So, a couple strategies that we put together. One is, I think, especially at that level, it's so important to know what you're spending your money on. Like, what is this actually doing? If I just give you $75, what in the world are you going to do with that? And so being able to create something tangible that a donor says, that's what I did. So, for example, we had a point shoe campaign. We go through 1,500 pairs of point shoes in a season. I think it's something around $135,000 a year that we budget for point shoes. And a pair of point shoes costs around $75. So for donors, we set up these little dip jars where you come and just tap your credit card on it in the lobby. And it was set at a preset amount for $75. We had a big like tower of used point shoes. And we, please buy a pair of point shoes for our company. And so you could tap that thing, and then when you go sit in that audience and you see that dancer on stage with their pair of point shoes, you can say, I bought one of those. Like, I did that. Now, we also are trying to include them in, those newsletters that we talked about, the behind the scenes. We do these in studio rehearsals that even if you can't come in, you can watch online. So we try, we let them know what the season's going to be ahead of time. We try and ramp up their benefits as much as we possibly can, but there's just not enough time in the day to give them that same type of engagement that we give our $50 and $100,000 donors. And so being able to make them feel good and ask them, surveys after shows, what did you think? How was your experience being a donor? Sometimes just asking the question that we want your feedback is so impactful because oftentimes you see those people that give $25 to an organization or $75 and they never hear from them again until it's time for their next $75 gift. I wouldn't say that we can do a better job because we certainly can do a better job, but we're really trying to make sure that they feel part of the family because they make up collectively such a big part of what we do.
And I think that's the important thing. And, I want all of our listeners to understand that even if you do just give 5 or $10 to your local ballet company, that adds up really quickly. If you have 5,000 people each donating $10, that makes a big difference. And so don't feel like you have to donate 2,500 or $25,000. You can donate 10 and it will have an impact.
That's right. That's right. And even like, if you're a parent in the school, I know a cost to get ballet training. There are so many students out there that would love to train and their families can't afford it. And we build those scholarship programs so we can help those students. And if you care enough to bring your child, then an extra $10, an extra $20 might help another student. I mean, that's a class, for one other student. So it really is critical. And if people have that view of like, oh, what's $25 really going to do? If everyone had that view, we would lose 25 to 30% of our total individual giving. So it is so critical and so critical that people feel our gratitude for that. I think that's one thing that makes me the most sad is that I don't have the time to call 1,000 people and say thank you. I wish I did because it is so important that they know no matter the amount, it's the fact that you are choosing to give your discretionary income to this organization. And that means a lot.
Okay, let's have the talk that everybody is kind of whispering about and everyone's talked about forever, right? That
Sure.
this exists and all the things. So let's talk about that high network donor class. Those people that donate a ton of money. Does pay to play exist? Can they get their kid a job? Get their foot in the door? How much pay to play exists?
Can't tell you that ballet over the years has gone through a lot of things that used to be a standard operating procedure that now we look back and are shocked that the industry ever worked that way. I would say nowadays, I have not heard of that in a very, very, very long time. And we are following so many nonprofits' best practices, and there are policies in place about donations and about benefits people can get from donations. Our labor attorneys are looking at it. I mean, we really try to separate that out. And in fact, we don't actively ask most of our dancer parents for funding. That's just not a strategy we want to employ because we don't want to have to. I mean, you do bring up a good point. Imagine, let's say you have a dancer, right? And their parents are donating $100,000 to the ballet. Well, the artistic director, for whatever reason, may not want to give that dancer a contract the following year. And that could be a $100,000 hit to the company. And we don't want to be in that position. Nobody wants to be. The art and the donations need to remain separate. If we're not doing that, then what are all these kids working so hard for? Why do they start training at 3 years old so they can get that role in that show because they've been working on it their whole lives? And someone else with less training but a bigger pocketbook comes in and takes that opportunity away from them. So I can't tell you it never happens, but I don't know of it actively happening. And I believe now that more and more ballet companies, as information is so widely shared these days, really are following an ethical model of what is appropriate benefit for people to get for their donations. And we will try and go above and beyond for our $100,000 donors to make sure they feel that gratitude, but it has to have some boundaries. And we're very clear with our donors on the front end about what they're going to receive and what they're not going to receive for that donation.
Dancer sponsorships fit into that. You see that in every program that this dancer is the so and so, fund or sponsored by an anonymous donor. And that's I think where people start to say, "Oh, anonymous donor, I wonder if that's like his parents."
Oftentimes, anonymous donor means someone who doesn't want their name out there publicly that they donate because they will get calls from 20 other nonprofits asking for them to donate to their organization. The sponsor a dancer, it is a strategy for raising funds, but it is not any different at least in our view, of someone who chooses to sponsor live music or be the presenting sponsor of a show. They want their name out there to say, I support this art form or this individual person. Even that program itself has had to go through a lot of iterations recently with labor attorneys, with unions involved, because you have to be very clear that you are sponsoring a person in name only. There's no way that by you sponsoring a dancer gives you any access to that dancer that you would not otherwise have. We have to be very, very protective of our dancers. And we are proud to be very protective of our dancers because they are what we are here for. You know, we wouldn't exist without them. But earlier, to your point of trying to fundraise in this new era, we are still having to be creative. And sometimes people do like to know this is what I'm sponsoring. I'm sponsoring a specific thing, but it really isn't any different than saying I'm sponsoring the Nutcracker or I'm sponsoring live music. It's just something for the donor to feel that there's a tangible, they know what their sponsorship is going to.
So what you're trying to say is that was not always so, and then people had a little bit more access to the dancers. I appreciate
Think
you trying to protect dancers.
I think that we all know that ballet has had some dark things that have happened in its history over the last few hundred years, and, I think there were absolutely times that, that was inappropriate. Not at any time recently that I am aware of, but I know it's something that there is a very at least I can speak as an executive director, almost a parental protection of our company and our company members. And because some of them are also 18, 19, 20 years old, and they give so much of themselves. And the very least we can do is make sure that they are taken care of and someone is looking out for them.
I can really appreciate you saying that, and
I think we're working harder against it because we know that there are preconceived notions about this art form that are not untrue about how things used to be in an abusive environment that many dancers existed in and the trauma that they experienced because they loved an art form and wanted to dedicate their lives to it and were willing to take very little compensation for a career that you can do for a finite amount of time. I mean, what they give so that we can exist is amazing. And I'm just embarrassed of how many decades we abused that. So I think if anything, we are working extremely hard because we know what the past was and we've got to fight proactively against it all the time.
well, and I think acknowledging that it was that way, I think is a great step in the right direction as well, right? It's just acknowledging that, dancers were abused and compensation has always been lower. So let's
So,
talk about it.
yeah, absolutely.
So when a company sits down to negotiate with AGMA, who's at that table and what is each party's role in that process?
Sure. So when we sit down, and again, every company does it a little bit differently, but when we sit down to negotiate with AGMA, from our side, there is myself, who typically is the lead negotiator for the organization. We have our labor attorney who's there just making sure that everything we're agreeing to, that we're following labor laws and there aren't any concerns about that. We have our artist manager, or in some companies called a company manager, and this is the person that knows the AGMA agreement memorized, knows every in and out of it so they can speak to, oh, that might not work because there's this clause over here on page 15. So they're making sure that, we are upholding everything that's in the CBA. We typically like to leave our artistic directors out of those negotiations. Their time to build their relationship with the dancers is in the studios. And we just would hate for anything to happen in the negotiating room to impact that relationship. So it's typically just the three of us from the organizational side. On the AGMA side, you have the AGMA's representative, which is not a member of our organization. And then the dancers select multiple dancer representatives, or artist representative, I should say, because it's not always dancers. We also have stage managers as well. And so they're there to speak on behalf of the company of artists. And they'll go back and meet with the company and say, here's what we talked about. And here's what they're offering, here's what we're offering. And so typically that's how the structure works in negotiation. I will say that we're grateful. We have worked really hard to have a very good relationship with AGMA. One of the ways we've gotten there is just being completely transparent. We show them our financials, not only just the financials that everyone can see online, but our 3-year projections of where we're going. What are the big things that are concerning us? What are we doing about it? So that they can see when we are negotiating, we're trying to take care of the dancers as best we possibly can, the artists, I apologize, stage managers as well. And two, make sure they have a job the following year and the year after that and the year after that. Because it would be easy to say, well, let me give you all the compensation that you want this year. But if that's not sustainable, then I might not have a job for you in 2 years or 3 years because we'd have to go through significant budget cuts if we even stay solvent. So how about we work together to find what is something that you can feel good about and it helps you in your living wage, but also is sustainable so that we can be doing this year after year. And if you want to make this your home, you can. We have a dancer, Brian Simcoe, that's retiring this year after 22 years of being at this organization. He came
Wow.
as a student. He's now a principal. And that's part of it is because we were able to offer him a life that he could make here in Portland because we were making sometimes challenging but sound fiscal decisions. And so thankfully that relationship, there is also a lot of mutual trust and respect there. And so it's not been as combative as I know it can be at other places.
Why do you think it is combative? I mean, I had heard stories from dancers in other companies who were renegotiating their collective bargaining agreement, and they would get in. It became really adversarial, and the artistic staff in these cases were involved. And I kind of like that you don't have your artistic staff involved because it kind of takes them out of the equation. But it was things like schedules, right, or call times, or day-to-day logistics that from where I sat seemed kind of petty that they were fighting over this. But why do you think that kind of stuff happens?
Well, the compensation for a structure for a dancer is a little bit different than what most people I think would be used to. Dancers work on a set amount they're going to make weekly, and they make that same amount whether or not they're called in rehearsal every day or they're called in rehearsal 2 days. And so obviously, and unfortunately, in our industry, we don't always pay enough that dancers can make a full living wage because they're often not year-round contracts, seasonal contracts, anywhere from 32, 34, 40 weeks. So the dancers, understandably, would love to know in as much advance notice as possible how many days are you going to call me into rehearsal for that week because I may need to go do other stuff or I would just like to know what my week's going to look like. And so sometimes they get very passionate, understandably, about knowing what that is. Now you got to think about it from the artistic side. And sometimes you are paying a dancer for that 40 hours, regardless of if they're there that whole time. And sometimes rehearsals need to change week to week based on what happened the week before. If there were sections that didn't go very well, and the artistic director's like, well, we need to get in and clean that up. So let's change this and put a rehearsal in here because we need to call these people back. Or if a section went great, maybe we can skip that for next week. And so the artistic directors, I think understandably, want as much flexibility as possible. But the dancers don't wanna just sit around all day waiting to find out, am I gonna dance today or not? And so you do have to find that balance. And I think more than anything, it's just an understanding of our different perspectives. And because I'm not gonna say we haven't had those same conversations, and because we have, but they weren't combative because we understood what they were trying to get to. And then through us talking them through our perspective, they understood why we made some of the choices or needed some of that flexibility. And so we found, a happy medium of we'll try and post certain things as early as possible with the understanding that we can't promise, what if someone gets injured and we got to pull you into a rehearsal you weren't called into because someone got injured. So I think more than anything, people just want to know that you understand where they're coming from and you're willing to work with them. Sometimes there are companies that can just be so, this is the way it is, take it or leave it. those are the companies that I find you get more of that adversarial relationship, and are often the companies I find that don't have the same level of transparency as some others. I see no reason why I wouldn't share with our dancers how well we did financially with a single show or a fundraising campaign or our gala or the year, because it impacts them just as it impacts us. And I know there are other companies that are more hesitant to share that financial information, but I think we're all in this together. The more transparent we can be, the more we can be on the same team.
The way you're describing it feels like a startup, right? Like we're all building this thing together. And I mean, I love that. I came out of the startup world, so I love when I hear that it's all transparent. It just always struck me that like your art, not you, but these ballet companies are arguing over, does the schedule come out 3 days in advance or 2 days in advance? That just feels to me like that's a communication issue more than anything. That, if you have that transparent and open communication, whether it comes out 3 days or 2 days in advance, that's a solvable problem.
Absolutely. And I love the comparing it to a startup because it does feel like it. And nonprofit arts, you're living and dying every year. And so it does feel like every year is the start of a new journey. And, as you well know with startups, it's just as much about what you're doing as who you have in the room doing it with you. So we are trying to build a place that people are proud to be here. They feel that we care about who they are as individuals, not just as artists, not just what they do on the stage, which is why I'm happy to sit down and talk about a career in arts administration if they ever want to come to the dark side. But it very much feels like a startup. And, in the nonprofit world, even on the administrative side, we can't pay the same kinds of salaries that people make in the for profit world. And on top of not paying the same kinds of salaries, it's not a 40-hour week job. You got 40 hours just in the office, and then you have shows on the weekends, and then you have shows in the evenings, and then you have, donor dinners and other things you have to go to. So the people that are here because they love it. And at least we can respect that and try and make them feel part of something and not just that they're doing, we're doing them a favor by giving them a paycheck.
So, speaking of paycheck,
Yeah.
why are dancers seasonal as opposed to everyone else in the organization that is year round?
Well, dancers are not the only people that are seasonal, and it predominantly has to do for a long time, it had to do with just the way seasons were built, and I mean, outside of ballet, even if you look at national touring Broadway shows, you look at symphonies, they're built around the school year, and they're built around the school year because that's when the most people are in any given city, and a lot of those people go off and they take, travel in the summertime or during the holiday break, they're gone. And so you found organizations starting to say, well, we're going to do shows when they have the most people in the town because that's when we're selling the most tickets. And Portland's a little bit unique because this is the place people go in the summertime. So that was, I think, the impetus for why they were originally seasonal and why they're still seasonal is unfortunately just a matter of finances. I don't think that there are enough shows that we could do in the summertime when school's out and people's schedules are all over the place that could drive the kind of revenue that we would need to pay those dancers' salaries, which can range anywhere from 40 to 70,000 a week for the company. And then there's also the contributed revenue side. If there was more support, whether it be contributed or ticket sales, and there are some, very few, but some companies, especially ones that do have a broader support base that are able to offer year-round contracts. And I think all of us, that's our dream. How do we get there? And right now it's such a challenge just to remain being able to do what we're doing. And we're trying to develop new strategies to see how we can extend those contracts. But it's, our teachers in the school, our orchestras, our stagehands, our wardrobe departments. Many of them are seasonal just because that is how the arts and entertainment seasons had been built for so long, which is just based on there is critical mass in any given community.
What would it take to move everybody into being paid year round? I mean, and the reason I ask is, the marketing department is paid year round, right? And the operations department and the development department, they all work year round. What would it take to get the people who are on the front lines of actually performing to be paid year round as well?
It all comes down to dollars. And, for every company that's gonna be different. It's anywhere from 18 to 20 weeks of additional work or additional compensation. And to your point, yeah, the marketing teams, they're selling tickets in the off season. Most companies do a big summer nutcracker sale, and so they're focused on that and selling season tickets, and development team is building up all those corporate sponsors and donor relations for the next season. But it really just comes down to support. The Western business model for the arts in the US is so heavily reliant on contributed income. If there was even a little bit of, say, government support, that would go a huge way in helping us provide that. But other than that, we would have to find ways to generate more revenue. And I will say that ballet companies and arts in general, not just ballets, there aren't a lot of arts organizations that are leaving money on the table. We are trying everything we can to generate more revenue to be able to take care of our people. But it all comes down to that. I mean, I would say revenue and also demand from our audiences. We would need to be able to show that in the summertime, we still can have the same kind of success that we see during the school year because dancers are predominantly just here to rehearse whatever is the next ballet. And, as you know, they finish it and then got to forget about it and go in and start rehearsing on the next one. So that additional, 15 to 20 weeks, typically dancers are getting anywhere from 4, 6, 7 weeks at most rehearsal time before they need to do a show. So additional 15 weeks could be 3 more performances. But is there going to be demand from that in the marketplace to keep that going?
So OBT unionized in 2017. Is
Uh-huh.
that correct?
Yep.
So, what has having a union contract changed about how the company operates?
I think it changed a lot of things for the better. I think it institutionalized a lot of things because we didn't have the same standards always of this is when schedules are going to be and if you are, this is what it means if you get hazard pay because if you're going to be, flying 20 feet above the air, you should probably be compensated for that. And as opposed to an individual dancer trying to fight for themselves, who may or may not have had a lot of experience in that or may not feel very comfortable saying this is what I demand. You have someone looking out for them that we do it as collectively. It takes away the individual, like we need to talk one on one and you need to tell me what you need. This is what we're going to do for everybody. So from an equity lens, it raises the bar because everyone is treated the same. Now that goes both ways. Everyone is treated the same. So it doesn't mean that we can always make exceptions for one person that we wouldn't make for the rest of the company. And sometimes that means the answer's got to be no, because I can't say yes to you if I have to say no to somebody else for the same request. But in general, it's a very positive thing. It keeps the dancers knowing that there's someone looking out for their compensation and what they're getting compared to other ballet companies, how often they can work in a week, the kinds of work they're being asked to do, the kinds of work they can say no to, what is something that's a volunteer versus a demand. I think a donor event's a great thing, like a great example of that. We cannot force our company to go to a donor event. If they don't want to do that, that's not part of we're not paying them to work in our development team. They're there to be our artists, our performers. Now, many of them choose to go partly because they understand what it does for the organization and that 30% of every paycheck they get is from donations. But before, I think there was pressure or it was just demanded of everyone that you have to attend these things. And so now there's someone looking out for them to make sure that I think again, combating those years and years of not treating dancers like they should have been treated. It is good that they have someone that is outside of this organization that says, I understand what's happening in this industry as a whole. While we connect with my colleagues and other executive directors a lot, I also, sometimes you feel on an island because you're the only professional ballet company in your community doing exactly what you do. And so it's hard to find someone else to say, what did you do when this came up? And so the unions are there to help level the playing field for everyone. So it's hopefully a similar experience no matter what company you go to. their standards of how you're going to be treated, how you're going to be compensated. We make great strides with that union representation for dancers. Because again, going back to your daughter as a great example, imagine coming out at 18 and saying, "Hey, if you're going to fly me, I'd like to get paid $10 or 15 more an hour because that's not as safe." That's hard. That would be hard for me when I was 18 to ask for that. So having someone else to make sure that that's being done, I think is a great thing.
So, can I ask you, do individual dancers negotiate their salaries?
They can. Yes, they can. There is what the union agrees to is a base wage for the different levels. If you're a ranked company, some companies don't do soloists and principals, many do. And what the union says is that these are the minimums you have to meet for those different ranks. But we still do offer every contract to every individual dancer. And they have an opportunity to come in and say, this isn't going to work for me. And we try to find a resolution.
Does that happen often?
I think it is fairly common. I think that it depends a lot on the personality of the company. I should say, maybe personality is the wrong word, but how comfortable the dancers feel in that company. Do they feel comfortable to speak to an artistic director or executive director and say, could we meet about this? It has to do with the financial realities they live in. We've had dancers that come to us and say, I absolutely want to stay here. I just cannot afford it. Like, I can't afford to live, and so we try to address that as best we can. So, yeah, I think it does happen. I wouldn't say that every single dancer comes in, and I think that our more senior company members have probably feel more comfortable with that than some of our newer company members, but we always get the occasional newer company member that is very comfortable with it, and I'm all for it. It doesn't mean that we can always give everything everyone they want because, again, it's not just about what you're making this season. It's about a sustained job and a sustainable organization, but we certainly work with them as best that we can.
Can I ask you a question about kind of the benefits that dancers get? And I don't mean health benefits. Like one thing I really underestimated with my son is he's going to college basically for free. Like not completely for free, but it is heavily subsidized. And that is because his company has negotiated some sort of an arrangement with a local university. I think their dancers sometimes don't remember, like they don't aren't aware of all of the things that go into their compensation package that they can take advantage of that they may not be aware of. How do you guys try to offer things like educational benefits or retirement plans? And I know AGMA has their own retirement plan, but things where dancers may not see the actual dollar value until they take advantage of it.
We're always looking at that. We're always trying to find out ways that we can increase the value proposition for our dancers. First and foremost is their health and make sure that they are taken care of medically and not in a way that, yes, you have insurance and you could go pay a bunch of copays every time you get injured. But we have, on site physical therapists, wellness coordinators. We work with, different doctors who volunteer their time to come in and work with our company on a regular basis to make sure they're healthy. And again, this isn't just to keep them on the stage for that next show. We're not in the days of like give them a steroid shot and get them back out there. If they shouldn't be dancing, we are the first ones to say, don't get on that stage because that's their paintbrush. That is how they communicate artistically through their bodies. And there's so many like how many dancers end their careers early because of injury. And so that's a big part of it. Education is another big part of it. And especially in these days of schools that are starting these daytime programs for trainees that are 13, 14, 15 years old, it's getting to a point now that if you wait until you graduate from high school to get into a daytime training program, you might now be years behind the competition because there's other students that have already set up, well, I'm going to go to a training program starting at 15 and I'm going to start doing homeschool and all this. What is the impact on those dancer, but on those individual lives? Because they may not all get the professional contracts that they were looking for. And they don't have an education to back that up to say, okay, well, now I'm going to move on to the next thing. We're making some inroads with education. We have more work to do, and we're looking at that ways that we can continue to. We would love to be able to offer our dancers, you finish here and you can have your degree. And if you choose to have a career in that opportunity, you have that as well. I think some of the time that we spend I'll spend talking to the company about the business of the art form. I'm talking to them because I want them to know what it takes and hope that some of them are going to choose that career after they retire. Because one thing I will tell you that young dancers have that most young people do not is a work ethic, because this is such a demanding art form and it builds that work ethic in. And other organizations may not give that person a chance because of their background, but we know their passion. We know how hard they work. I've had some of my best staff ever that were retired dancers. So we're looking for that. We're looking for ways that we can give them time off if they have a guesting opportunity and they want to, go perform at a festival that's going to enhance their own personal brand or enhance their career. We want to make sure that they're a part of that. Annie started this new thing, this new program here. One of our shows we do every year called OBT by Design. And OBT by Design is when our dancers are choreographing on our second company. And right now, like for this season, we have 12 different dancers that have choreographed, and Danny, as a choreographer, is working with every single one of them to try and sharpen that choreographic voice, which is another thing a lot of companies don't worry about. You're here to dance for us until we're done or you're done. But building that choreographic voice is another way that we can focus on what is your career like after your time of dancing is over with. So I think there's still a lot of work we have and a lot of things that we can continue to do, but we are trying the best we can right now.
So, what would you tell a young dancer to look for or look out for before signing with like a company contract?
Well, I got to be careful with this one. I will say more and more the companies that are non-union really strive to have the same standard operating procedures as union companies. And to be fair, they probably do that partly because they don't want to become unionized companies. And for your listeners, so that they know, all it takes is for any company of dancers, 51% of them to vote to unionize, and the organization has to honor that. And so whether or not it's a company that's union or non-union, by and large, they're trying to treat them equally. I would always look at the rep of a company and say, is that artistically what excites me? I also think that, and that's one thing that has worked well for us here at OBT, is word of mouth. Because one thing a contract is not going to tell you, it's not going to tell you the culture in the studios. It's not going to tell you whether or not they care about you as an individual and are trying to make you a better dancer or just trying to get you on stage to do what they need you to do. So I think finding ways to, talk to people that in a company or have gone to that school and find a little bit more about the culture. Go to a summer intensive if you're interested in joining a company, even if you're not going for the full time. Go for a week or two and just see what the culture is like, because most contracts now, we share a lot of information again amongst executive directors. Most of a dancer contracts, they all pretty much look the same. You're going to be hard pressed to find a contract that doesn't follow the similar format as here's the compensation, here's the weeks, here's the days off, here's your holidays. And then AGMA, if you are AGMA, here's everything else that goes into it with the collective bargaining agreement. So I would look at union or non-union and decide if that's, if you're comfortable in that. I think there are some fantastic non-union companies out there, but the union has become more and more of a standard. I think the culture is incredibly important. The rep is incredibly important because everything is on social media. How do you see them promoting people? Are they promoting people from their second company into their company? Or are they just bringing in new people? When they promote a soloist or a principal, is that someone that's been at the company for a while and they promoted that person, which tells you they've invested in this person to make that person better and now they can promote that person? Or are they constantly bringing in new people when they want a new soloist and a new principal? And what does that say about the culture in the studio? And what does that say about the talent of the company if they don't feel like they can pull from their own people to get those roles? I'm not saying that every time it has to be, because there's always dancers that want to move to other places for a variety of reasons, whether it be rep or geography or, being close to family. But knowing that they are promoting some within, I think look at the administrative side, look at kind of what support they have on the admin side. And the number one thing I would say is look at their financials online. No matter what an organization tells you, their values are in their financials. How they spend their money are their values. And so being able to walk through a 990, understand what a 990 means and what, the audited financials look like, you can tell a lot about a company by seeing where they decide to spend their money.
I think that that's actually very, very, very helpful. I appreciate your honesty in that because I think it's something that people, I mean, Brett's talked about 990s forever for me. And in the beginning, I was like, I don't know what she's talking about. And now I'm like, I pay attention to them all the time because they are very informative if
They
you read
are.
them.
And it talks also about how their leaders are being compensated and look at that as a percentage of the overall budget. And is that in line with industry standards? I mean, those are important things because they tell you a lot about the company's value.
Well, and the other thing I would tell every dancer is read the contract.
Absolutely.
I mean, my son got his first contract and he signed it and he sent it in. And I said, "Well, did you read it?" And he's like, "No, I just wanted to make sure I had the job." And I said, "Well, maybe you should think about reading it now."
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it was an AGMA contract, so it was 47 pages long.
That's right.
And he wasn't going to read it. So I said, "Give it to me." And I read it. And I kept telling him, like, "Did you know you have this retirement plan? Did you know you're getting this?" And he had no idea. And so I always tell parents when they ask us, read the contract because you're gonna learn a lot.
And if there's things you don't understand about the contract, ask somebody else. Like, don't just assume. I think I read so many contracts, it's just a foregone conclusion that everyone's going to read every contract. But you're right, especially people are getting their that's such an exciting moment. They've been looking forward to that since they were first, went into a studio at 3 years old. And of course, you just want to sign it, but you got to understand what you're signing and what you're
Sure.
signing up for to be a part of.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially the kids that are young, right? That are starting in this industry when they're 18 or 19 years old. In my career in corporate America, I will admit I very rarely read an entire contract. But I knew what to look for, right? Like you
That's right.
kind of scan through it and you go, okay, that I got that, I got that. But when you're 18 or 19 years old, you should be reading every word because it's also good practice.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay, so this has been a great 2 hours with you. I
Well,
can't
thank you
believe
so
we've already
much.
gone through this. I have one last question for you. So, if you could wave a magic wand and change one or two things immediately about the ballet world, what would it be?
Boy, that's a big question. And maybe it's because I'm an executive director and I swim in a sea of numbers. I would love to see arts organizations that are not having to make so many choices based on revenue. Love to see what kind of season Danny would build if I wasn't with the marketing department saying, we need a lot of sales because of this show and the net between these two shows. Like, there's so much about this art form that we are not exploring and that we are not growing and nurturing because at the end of the day, we are a business. And at the end of the day, the best way we can take care of people is to make sure they have a job waiting for them. But that drives us to make decisions that are not always in the best interest of the art form. They're in the best interest of the financial health of that organization. I would love to see a world where we didn't have to spend so much time focused on donors. Not to say they're not important and we are not grateful, but it is a lot of time in managing those relationships and listening to their input and seeking their advice. It would be amazing to see what we could do strategically and artistically if we had more government support wherever it was, and so that we weren't just living and dying every year by how did this show do? How did your gala do? What's your end of year campaign goal going to be? Because it forces us to make decisions. And I think that in many ways it has, stifled our growth artistically. I will tell you, dancers don't love doing the Nutcracker every year. I know it's going to be a shock. I know it's a shock. I
You
know it's a
don't
shock.
say.
I know. I mean, I think there are some students. I mean, it's a really important part of the ballet experience, but how cool would it be if we could do a different production every December and
Sure.
still have that many kids? How cool would it be if it wasn't? Now, a lot of people would argue that that's also the entry point for so many people in ballet, and we wouldn't have the audiences we have today or the students we have without the Nutcracker. And I get that. It's almost all driven by the fact that it generates 20% of our annual revenue. And I think that I would just love to see a world where the art form could just be the art form and let it organically grow. Because I think you would see really incredible stuff. But unfortunately, we haven't found a way to monetize really incredible work all the time.
Is there anything that we did not ask you that you would like to end on today?
I just hope, if anything, that people understand how much work goes in to running these organizations and how many people put blood, sweat, and tears into it. And wherever you are, whether it's donating $5, buying a ticket, signing up a student, going to a free dance day, these people are doing it because they absolutely love what they do. And if you believe in this art form and believe what it can do, try and support it as best you can, and whatever that means for you personally. But we're not in the world I just previously spoke of, and I think we're in a world that's becoming increasingly more unstable. And the arts has a really important role in bringing people together. Support your local ballet schools and ballet companies. That would be my one thing. It's so needed.
And thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lovely conversation.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you both so much.
If you're enjoying the Ballet Help Desk podcast, please take a moment and subscribe, rate, and drop us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And while you're at it, don't forget to swipe that auto download button so you never miss an episode. Thanks so much for your support. Until next time, the Help Desk is now closed.